Afternoon, the father of a Forsyth County woman who died at a house party says his family does not believe the sheriff's office conclusion that her death was an accident. Tamla Horsford's death has gained international attention this month.
On the morning of November 4th, 2018 in Forsyth County, Georgia.
Sheba, this story is sparking outrage and national attention. 40-year-old Tamla Horsford was found dead in the backyard of a home in Cumming, Georgia. A social media campaign for the mother is now demanding a thorough investigation. Many people are calling it a suspicious death, spreading a theory that she was murdered at a party.
A life was lost under circumstances that have left an entire community questioning what really happened.
That's right, but we begin tonight with the death of Tamla Horsford. Now the Forsyth Sheriff's Office says it's case closed in this one, but Hope Ford found out a lot of people out there aren't buying it, Hope.
Tamla Horsford, a beloved mother of 6, a devoted wife, and a woman full of energy and compassion, was found dead in the backyard of her friend Jean Meyer's home. At first glance, it seemed like an unfortunate accident, a woman who had fallen after a night of drinking. But as the investigation unfolded, disturbing questions began to surface, and the truth seemed to slip further out of reach. This is the tragic story of Tamla Horsford, a woman whose untimely death would set off a chain of events, filled with inconsistencies, unexamined details, and an investigation that has left her family, friends, and many others searching for answers. Today we are going to unravel the disturbing mystery behind her death, a case that has sparked outrage, confusion, and a call for justice that has yet to be answered. The heart of a mother. Tamla Horsford was born in 1978 in the Caribbean, but it wasn't long before she moved to the Bronx, New York, when she was just 11 years old. After growing up in the vibrant, fast-paced environment of the city, she later moved to Florida, where she met her husband, Leander, known to friends and family as Lee. Despite coming from two different worlds, the couple formed a loving, supportive bond. Tamla and Lee went on to raise 6 children together, and she stepped into the role of a mother with grace and dedication. Tamla's ability to bond with her family extended to her stepdaughter, from Lee's previous relationship, a young girl who Tamla raised as her own from the moment she entered their lives. Their mother-daughter relationship was strong, despite not being biologically related. She loved her children fiercely, devoting her time to their well-being, from cheering them on at their sporting events to managing their schoolwork and extracurriculars. Tamla's larger-than-life personality made her the center of attention wherever she went, and her magnetic presence drew people to her. Those who knew her described her as funny, charismatic, kind-hearted, and inclusive, someone who genuinely cared for others. But beneath her energetic and vibrant exterior, Tamla's story was woven into the complexities of the town she had moved to, Forsyth County, Georgia. The county has a long and troubled history marked by systemic racism and violence. In 1912, the lynching of a man named Rob Edwards for a crime he didn't commit set off a horrific wave of racial terror that led to the forced exile of black residents. By 1987, when a march was held to bring attention to racial injustice, those deep-seated prejudices still festered. Forsyth County remained largely white, with only a few people of color remaining in the area. By the time of Tamla's death, the county was still predominantly white, and its history of racial discrimination would later add a troubling dimension to the investigation. A sleepover that turned tragic. In the fall of 2018, Tamla's life was about to take another turn. Her family had settled in Forsyth County, and Tamla was eagerly anticipating the arrival of her first grandchild. It was a milestone she was thrilled to experience, and she couldn't wait to become a grandmother. On November 3, 2018, she received an invitation from a friend named Jean Myers to attend a sleepover party at her home. Although they had only met a couple of months earlier through their son's football team, Jean invited Tamla to the gathering. Jean was hosting the sleepover to relax, have fun, and most importantly, ensure no one would have to worry about drinking and driving. The sleepover initially seemed like a harmless get-together of women, but from the start, there were complications. Tamla had expressed reluctance about going, feeling unsure about whether she really wanted to attend. Despite these reservations, Tamla, always the kind-hearted soul, decided not to let anyone down. Lee, her husband, initially had plans for the evening but chose to stay home with their children, so Tamla could have some time for herself. Unease beneath the surface. The night of the party was full of laughter, drinking, and mingling. Tamla arrived later than the other guests, but when she did, she was in high spirits. She was dressed in a white onesie adorned with gray paw prints and colorful socks. Easygoing and fun, the picture of someone who was looking to unwind. She bought a bottle of tequila, a gift she thought would be appreciated, though it was quickly rejected by Jean, who despised tequila. Still, the drink was shared among the group, but Tamla ended up drinking most of it herself. As the night progressed, a growing sense of unease settled over the gathering. Although the party was intended to be a lighthearted affair, with games and drinks, there were subtle tensions beneath the surface. Tamla, despite her usual outgoing nature, spent much of the night alone outside, smoking cigarettes by herself. This was unusual because she was known for always having someone accompany her when she stepped outside. But on this night, she was alone for long periods. Was this a sign of something more, something deeper? A gruesome scene in the backyard. Around 8:30 a.m. the next morning, Jean's aunt, Madeline, went to the window and saw something she would never forget. Tamla's body, face down in the backyard. The details were horrifying. Tamla, in her pajamas, was sprawled out in the grass, seemingly lifeless. Madeline, upon seeing the scene, knelt down and said a prayer. This initial response to a body found outside was odd. Instead of rushing to check for a pulse to see if Tamla was still breathing, Madeline opted to pray. It was only after that she went to wake Jean and Jose, the boyfriend of the host, to let them know what she had seen. Tamla was then found face down in the grass, her arms stretched at her sides. This would become a key point in the investigation, as it seemed odd for someone to fall from such a height and land with their arms by their sides. Witnesses at the scene would later describe the position of her body in one way, but when the authorities arrived, the positioning of her limbs was reported differently. How did her arms end up bent out of position, as if she had tried to brace herself for the fall? The questions begin. As the authorities arrived, the scene was quickly labeled an accident. Tamla's death was attributed to a fall, either from the balcony or from the ground level. The forensic investigation, however, raised troubling inconsistencies. Tamla's body showed signs of cuts and abrasions, but none of her facial bones were broken, which was surprising for someone who had supposedly fallen from a height of 14 feet. Her injuries didn't match the narrative. How could someone fall from such a height and sustain only minor injuries? The absence of facial fractures or skull damage, which is typically expected in such falls, raised more questions than it answered. The lack of proper crime scene documentation, missing autopsy photos, and the rushed conclusions only added to the confusion. And the most shocking part of all, Tamla was found to have Xanax in her system. Yet no one at the party had seen her take any medication, and she was not known for using Xanax. Bridget Fuller, who had a prescription for Xanax due to her anxiety, was one of the few at the party who could have been a source for the drug. Yet no one could explain how Tamla came to have it in her system. Disturbing behavior and suspicions of cover-up. As the investigation continued, more disturbing details emerged. The authorities' behavior raised eyebrows at every turn. Jean, who hosted the party, seemed almost indifferent to the gravity of the situation. She even made a joke about how all police officers love Dunkin' Donuts before handing them gift cards, an odd move in such a sensitive situation. Further investigation revealed that one of the officers, Jose Pereira, had accessed confidential information about the case. Another officer, Mike Christian, had been removed from the case after leaking confidential files. These issues, combined with the poor handling of the crime scene, led many to believe that the investigation was being mishandled on purpose. The fact that the investigators were allowed to remain in close contact with the key witnesses, who were also not separated during interviews, only added fuel to the fire. Why had the authorities allowed this to happen? Was it possible that the investigation was deliberately steered toward an easy conclusion, an accidental fall, so that questions about potential foul play could be avoided? Calls for justice. As the case progressed, public outcry grew louder. The Horsford family, with the help of their lawyer, Ralph Fernandez, pushed for a re-examination of the evidence. They argued that the original investigation was flawed and that the true circumstances surrounding Tamla's death had not been fully explored. But despite the calls for justice, the police maintained their stance that Tamla's death was an accident. The lack of an adequate investigation, combined with the questionable behavior of those involved, only added to the belief that justice had been denied. The unsolved mystery of Tamla Horsford's death. To this day, the mystery of Tamla Horsford's death remains unsolved. The inconsistencies in the investigation, the troubling evidence, and the unanswered questions continued to cast a shadow over her family's grief. Was Tamla's death really an accident, or was it something more sinister? The Horsford family, along with many others who have followed the case, continue to demand justice. They are not content to let this case fade into the background. Tamla's death may have been ruled an accident, but the echoes of suspicion and the calls for justice persist. Tamla Horsford deserves the truth. Her family deserves answers. And as we continue to reflect on her story, we must ask ourselves, how many more families have been robbed of justice, of answers, and of the truth? How many more stories will remain unsolved because the system failed to listen, failed to question, and failed to seek the truth?